Plant breeding is a pragmatic, applied science, taking genetic raw materials and turning them into something useful.
Our research is really relevant to climate change because the breeding approaches we're taking are for the future, so we want varieties for the future.
The goal of the plant breeder is to think about an endpoint. So you start with a goal in mind and you reach that goal, and then a new goal arises and it sort of renews itself and you keep going. But also to have long-term goals as far as renewing their germplasm pools and raw materials to ensure that there's adequate genetic variability to meet the challenges of things like climate change that are largely unknown.
Climate is changing, and one of the things, especially for a plant breeder, is you don't know exactly what those challenges might be in the next 10, 15, 20 years. Whether it's disease, whether it's heat tolerance, whether it's drought tolerance, whatever it's going to be. By maintaining that diversity, hopefully somewhere within that germplasm pool, you will have the genes that you need to be able to put together and create new varieties that have those tolerances.
The only way for us to be able to meet this challenge is to be able to collect and to preserve as much biodiversity, genetic variability as we possibly can. And plant breeders are the most important preservers of biodiversity.
The problems related to climate change from the standpoint of plants and agriculture, I think, are heat stress and disease pressure. As the climate changes, one can say the whole ecology changes, and that there are probably diseases and insects that we currently do not have today that will appear on the horizon and create new challenges that we're not even aware of today.
The milder winters will increase the fungal and insect pests, for sure. I lived in Oregon 23 years, and they have a mild climate there. And their diseases always hit earlier on rust, for example, than ours. But lately, rust has become a bigger problem here.
The drought tolerance work that we're doing is important. We're working on salinity tolerance, so as our water resources continue to sort of disappear and dry up, we need to have alternate sources of irrigation, and especially for turf grasses. So you can use a lot of our wastewater that is normally just discarded. We can use that to irrigate.
Things and the milder winters will certainly affect the plants themselves. Specifically, if we have hotter, wetter summers, it will definitely affect the annuals, things like tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants. We refer to them as being warm season and heat-loving crops, but in fact they don't like excessive heat. They shut down and don't grow. They don't set fruit. The flowers drop off. It's a stressful condition for them. Climate change
Impacts the adaptation of the cultivars that we grow here in New Jersey. I would say enhanced heat and the longer periods of heat incite more fruit rot pressure, which is probably the biggest issue here in the state.
Not only that, but we're seeing more and more invasive diseases and pests come in from other parts of the world and get themselves established here.
If you look at the native distribution of cranberries, they occur from largely South New Jersey out to eastern Minnesota and southeast Canada. And so New Jersey really represents the most southern adaptation zone for the wild cranberry. So as the climate is warmer, that adaptation zone may be moving further north. And both crops, I happen to work with blueberries and cranberries, require what we call winter chilling. The plants have essentially like an internal mechanism where they count the amount of chilling hours.
Certain plants need to accumulate cold temperatures in order to break dormancy in the spring. So there's a period of time above freezing, but below maybe 45 degrees Fahrenheit.
Temperatures below freezing actually do not contribute to the chilling. It's only temperatures that are above freezing that contribute to the chilling. And in fact, some of our warmest winters actually had the most chilling hours. But if we look out 20, 30 years or maybe 50 years in the future, Varieties that we are growing today may not be adequate for those conditions up and coming.
The rate of climatic change is a huge challenge because we need to be able to have some time to gather the genes, because most of the genetic systems that control crop performance under different climatic conditions are very complicated genetically. They take time to unravel, and that said, I'm absolutely convinced and optimistic that we're going to be able to meet this challenge because there is a tremendous amount of genetic variability out there.
As breeders, we make a hierarchy list of say traits or characteristics or problems we're trying to deal with, and I think that climate change needs to be pushed all the way to the top.
As long as resources to maintain these programs are provided and the breeders can continually select out the most adapted materials and breed with them, then there's hope that we can develop varieties that are going to be suited for the new conditions or the climate that we'll be experiencing in the next several decades or so.
With hazelnuts, I think we have a species that will provide us a really good opportunity to develop new cultivars able to withstand the unpredictable nature of climate change. There's a wealth of genetic diversity. You can find plants growing as far south as Morocco, and then as far north as into Scandinavia, north of Moscow. So if we can take plants from very far south and hybridize them with plants from the northern fringe regions, those offspring, some of those offspring may have the ability to be very widely adapted.
These are not just exercises in scientific theory. The breeding program here directly addresses the climate change because we're basically selecting out varieties that are adapted to the warmer temperatures, both in the winter and in the summer here, and the stresses that the higher temperatures impose. And the varieties that are developed are being utilized by the grower and the industry.
We have so many more powerful tools at our disposal to be able to access genes, to isolate them, to understand how they're expressed, how they interact with other genes, how they interact with the environment.
Every few months there's some new technique that makes everything go faster. And as we make DNA sequencing and genome sequencing faster and cheaper, it's going to become more and more reasonable for any plant breeder to be able to use these techniques.
The farmers really aren't thinking about it. They're so caught up in the day-to-day of how am I going to get past this broken tractor, and how am I going to, my pesticide out, it's raining out. For them to focus on something as broad-based and long-term as climate change is very, very difficult for them. And it's another good reason why I think it's something that we need to focus on in a place like a land-grant university, because there's very few other places in our society that we have the luxury of being able to look in the long term, because this is going to be a challenge, I think, for humankind, and I feel privileged that we're in a place like a land-grant university that we can start to think about this.